You didn't want to be all alone, darling. You didn't want to cry anymore. You didn't want to sit in your house. It's why you even crashed down my door. That's alright. Anyway that you are, it's just fine. It's just you can't do. So now we can fly.
That's right. Sometimes we're late to the party, or perhaps we don't want to join the party at all. In this instance, I certainly belong to the former category, since I am a fan of solid blockbusters that deliver on the hype while ingraining bits of cinematic beauty that make these films last beyond the hype of the time. So in the case of Jaws, there was no instance of me putting off the film in any way. Just a case of waiting for the right time, which just so happened to arrive so late. I've had this copy of the film for as long as I can remember, and I've recently purchased an upgrade in anticipation of experiencing it for the first time in the best way possible. This purchase actually took place a month or two before the film hit cinemas again, which somehow actually went over my head. When did I find out that a classic from the 70s I eagerly wanted to watch was playing at the cinema that's conveniently located 5 minutes away from me? On the fateful day of the very last screening. Funnily enough, I did face a bit of a dilemma when I realized I could have my first experience with Jaws on the big screen. Theater viewings can often be a gamble. Even if everything seems to fall in place, something can always fall out of place, ruining a scene or maybe even the whole film. Luckily, I was blessed with the sort of optimism that eases decision-making of this kind, allowing me to actually live a little from time to time. Excitement filled me up, so my dialect suddenly turned into gibberish at the counter, which is where I found out that I was going into a 3D screening. A nuisance for the purists, perhaps, but 3D is quite a rarity for me these days, so why not? Can't say I was ever a fan of the form, but strangely it added to the excitement this time around. And I have to say, the gimmick actually warranted its stay for this particular screening. Amusingly, the last movie I got to see in 3D was also directed by Steven Spielberg. But the only moment that stood out to me in that screening is practically one of the only moments I can recall from that movie. Just a key spinning around, center frame, like so. Point being, the rest of the 3D effects never really added to the spectacle that in itself fell short of reaching the heights it's trained for. As always, less is more, even in the case of 3D. The thoughtful subtlety of some of the staging allowed for that third dimension to immerse you that little bit further in the environment of the scene, feeling the intimacy of close proximity as that cigarette drapes in your peripheral vision, receiving an unusual point of view that only cinema can provide, and generally submerging yourself in the depths of the film's reality. Gotta love when a jump scare actually gets you. The 3D spectacle got me too, and by the time the film ended, I genuinely thought that wearing those glasses for the whole running time felt worthwhile. It was neat to feel like I could almost rest on that bit of wood, lean in a little closer and listen to the working class hero's presumptions.
I'm talking about working for a living. I'm talking about sharking.
Well, I'm not talking about hooking some poor dogfish or sand shark. I'm talking about finding a great white.
Porkers? Talking about porkers? Mr. Hooper? Just tie me a sheep shank.
As for the actual theater experience that enveloped all of this, it was alright. There were only a handful of people present that unfortunately weren't very quiet for most of the first act, but eventually stopped fattening their bags of popcorn and reserved their comments for moments that didn't take away from the overarching gravitas. The screen itself was fairly clean, with some very slight, smudge-like markings in areas that for me strangely added some appeal to the grit of the film stock. A lousy alignment of the projection, however, served as an imperfection that did rub me the wrong way, with over half of the film looking like this. When I noticed that an employee walked in, I signaled over to him and He actually ran over in a hunched state and apologized for the error that I'm sure had nothing to do with him, given his sincere kindness. That nice young man informed some other employees, which led to some fiddling, so the aspect ratio output went from this to this. Initially I just thought to myself, oh great, is that even better? But it actually ended up being better, somehow. Or perhaps just less noticeable given the lighting composition of most of the shots that followed, blending in almost seamlessly with the darker tones, while the bright daylight made this imperfection stick out like a sore thumb. Thankfully, this is one of those films that pull you in no matter what, distracting you from the surrounding distractions by surrounding you with purely cinematic details all along the way. It was so satisfying to witness the technical precision of some of these shots for the first time on such a grand scale, to the point of actually inspiring me and urging me to go out and pull off some wacky shots of my own that take way too long to get right but pay off indefinitely. It's way too easy to fall in love with the technology of film in general, but the specific capture of those darker hours produced a sort of organic image that simply cannot be recreated in digital. The look of the night on film is truly something to behold, with that particular sense of immersion only being heightened while sitting so up close around that table of colorful characters.
Dave, don't you worry about it, Chief. It won't be permanent. You want to see something permanent? Boom, boom, boom.
Enjoyed the human aspect just as much as the horror sensation that has cemented itself in pop culture. And deservedly so. Those practical effects have not aged a day. Easily some of the most impressive animatronic work put to film that unfortunately carries a bittersweet note in today's CGI-ridden era. Practical mastery largely being phased out prematurely remains as one of the great tragedies of modern cinema. Is there anything else I can add? The film is as iconic as they get, so naturally I didn't carry any negative preconceptions when going into it for the very first time. I suppose I had a slight idea about certain cliches playing into the spectacle, which I probably would have been on board with given the fact I have nothing against cliches if they're incorporated well enough. The instantly recognizable music could have had an overwhelming presence at every possible turn, but no. John Williams' magnificent score wasn't overused at all, and the subtle variations on that iconic theme enriched every moment they accompanied. Just like many other great films of the past, Jaws undeniably stood the test of time, holding its own as a creature feature that doesn't lack the necessary depth, filling the potential of the scope up to the brim while arguably blowing most of the close-knit competition out of the water thanks to its sincerity. A motion picture for the ages that certainly earned the hype it garnered over all these years.